Good morning, everyone. This is Sarah with Harrisburg Project. Today we're going to go over reports in iStar. I have picked some that I think are helpful that you should know about, but if you have any questions throughout, just let me know. I would be happy to, talk about other reports if you have some questions or ideas or things like that. So I've just picked some things that I think are important, especially this time of year. So those are just the things that I've thought of, that the other ladies here suggested based on questions that we get this time of year. So again, if you have questions beyond what I go over today, please let me know. I will try to show you what you need to see now or get back to you after the session regardless. But again, I have just picked some things that I think are helpful this time of year. So if you didn't get your handout, I didn't post it until late this time. So it is attached in the handout section of your GoToWebinar menu. So when you look at that menu, you should either see the menu, or if you don't, you should see an orange arrow. Just click on that. It will open up the menu, and then you can see your handout in that section. It's also on our website. And of course, we record this session, so it will be available later this week for you to come back to if you need to, or get those notes again. In addition, if you have not attended a session with us before, you can ask questions during the session in the questions pod. I will be watching that. So if you see me look over this way, I see someone said hi, hi, hi. So if you see me looking over to my right, that's what I'm looking for, to see if you have any questions as I'm going through the session. If I don't answer something immediately, it may be because we're going to talk about it soon. So, and then I have a couple things at the end that I didn't quite get in the notes, but things that I just kind of wanted to talk about as far as some reports go that aren't in iStar that may be helpful to you. So I'm going to touch on this is iStar alignment report as well. Even though that's not our report, it's something that can benefit both systems. So I'll go over that as well at the end. But we'll go ahead and get started. Remember, if you do have questions, just please let me know. If you think of something after the session, reach out to me. You can email or call, and we can talk reports then too. I think that there are a lot of reports in iStar. So sometimes that's overwhelming, and I realize that. So maybe sometimes you just need to tell us, hey, this is what I need. My board wants to see A, B, and C. Can you help me with this? And we may not be able to get you a PDF that's a pretty report. Maybe we were going to do something in Excel, but regardless, if you need numbers, we can try to help you get those. So always ask us if you can't find something that is in the system, or don't know if it's in the system, because again, there are many reports, so it can be overwhelming. So most of what we're going to talk about today are going to be application reports. So the application reports are going to relate to your actual data, whether it be personnel data, student data, etc. So we're going to spend a lot of time there. But before we go there, I wanted you to know about the reports that also are under this drop down, which can help you if you are working on correcting errors in iStar. So if you are working on your errors and you are seeing that you have overlaps with other districts and you need to talk to them about those, this is where you're going to find the person you need to contact. So if it's for personnel, you can run this report, search for the district. It's going to tell you can't get my words today. It's going to tell you who the data clerk is for that district. So sometimes we have districts that are a part of a co-op. That's not that uncommon, right? But sometimes those co-ops will manage the iStar data for their districts. Sometimes they don't. And we even have some co-ops that will do data for some of their districts, but not all of their districts. Or sometimes co-ops will do all the student data, but no personnel data. So as you can tell, we have a lot of different combinations. And when you're trying to figure out who that person is that you need to contact about data, it can be difficult. So as an example, in Harrisburg, our school district does not manage their own data. The co-op does that on their behalf. So if you are trying to resolve an overlap with Harrisburg, you're going to have a hard time if you call Harrisburg School District office. So if you call their unit office, you're not going to get the person you need. So this report's going to tell you that you need a person that is at WAVSED that performs this operation for Harrisburg School District. So that is the purpose of those reports. And so sometimes it can be difficult for you to figure out who that person is, but because we keep track of all that data in our common data system, then we're able to give a report that will help you with that. So when we are emailing you a couple times a year and saying, hey, we want to verify all of your data in your contacts table for us. We want to know who's your primary contact, who's your data manager, has anything changed this year? This is why we do that. We need to know, who do we need to email, who do we need to call, and who do we need to tell you to call or email if you have a problem. So those are the reasons that we bother you with those contact update emails, because we want to make sure that we've got the right person all the time. So you're going to see there are some others. So personnel and the site pupil ones are going to be the most commonly used, probably this student. So the site pupil is for the student approvals and claims. That's probably going to be the thing that you're looking at the most. However, we have other ones that say the administrator for the school is so-and-so, or the site personnel contact is so-and-so, or even site room and board. So if your districts do room and board, we do have a separate contact for that. So if it's someone different than is normally a data steward, then we will be able to tell you it's a different person than the student contact. So those are what the purpose of those reports. But after that, we're pretty much going to be talking about application reports. So the first report is probably one of the most commonly run reports. And that is why when we brought it from our previous system to this system, it is first in the list. It's alphabetical list of student approvals. And it will show everything that you need to see about an approval record. And if you just come up into an application report, you go to student and let it default to approvals, this is the first thing you're going to see. And essentially, it's going to print everything about a student, multiple records if they have them, but that gives you the ability to then filter and change what you want to see. So what I'm saying is it's going to give you everything, but then you know where you're starting. You know that you're starting with every possible record in your system for the year in alphabetical order. So you can then say, well, based on everyone, I only want this portion. So that's where you get into looking at, do you want to see IEPs that are active just today? Do you need to know all the IEPs that are active as of right now? So you don't want to see if they had an approval record that was active, in August, they had a change and it ended in October, and now they have another record. You don't want to see two records. You want to know today, who are my active IEP students, regardless of what they've done before. And so you'll be able to come down here, click the box that says active as of today. So maybe in that you want to see just a certain grade level or just a certain fund code. Then you can also change your filters here, all while knowing that you're only getting students that are active today. So active IEPs as of that moment. Now we have other filters for things in the future, active on December 1. Of course, those aren't all relevant right now. Okay, so right now you're really probably going to be focusing on the students that you have in the system today. Soon we will be worried about December 1, of course, but we haven't reached that date yet. So if you run it now, it's just a projection. It doesn't mean you can't look at that, but really it's not as relevant today as it will be here in about a month. Okay, so different ways that you can filter on that report, but just so you know, this is the report where you're going to start with everything, sorted by resident district. Every single student in ISTAR has a resident district. It doesn't matter where they go for their services, what their placement is. We're going to start with the resident district. It's a requirement for every approval record. Okay, so you know I'm starting with everything, and then I'm going to work from there to get what I need. Now, the beauty of this report is you can have a fancy, nice PDF report and print it out or save it somewhere or email it to someone or things like that, but you can also export it into Excel. So if you want to export everything, don't put any filters here. Okay, maybe you might want to say active as of today. That would help you a lot because you don't want to try to build that query inside Excel. However, maybe you do want to say, I want to export into Excel all my approval records that are active today. So active IEPs, you don't want a duplicate count of students. So an unduplicated count of students that have active IEPs on the day that you run it. Then you can export that into Excel, and you can filter it any way you want to in Excel. So filter, sort, etc. So if you don't know how to do that, I can help you with that a little bit. I'm no Excel expert by any means. I don't work for Microsoft, but I can help you, kind of manipulate data the way that you want to. So I know that maybe we're used to having PDF reports that print everything out and are pages and pages of what you want to see. However, I think that if you do start working in Excel, you will find that you have a lot of capabilities in that system. Now, does Excel print out nicely onto paper? Not usually. We can make it. We can make a report print on one page and look nice in grids. I don't mean that, but typically if you're just looking for raw data and you need to report numbers, Excel's going to be your way to go. Okay. All right, so this is what's going to be on that alpha list of student approvals. I know this is a pretty blank slide, but I hated to not put in what you're actually getting if you do print that report out. So if you printed the report to a PDF, this is what your header would look like. And of course, you would have all the data for the students underneath. And again, it's in alphabetical order. It's going to be sorted first by resident district. So if you're a co-op, this will be important to you because you don't want all of your students in alpha order from every district you have necessarily. Most of the time you want it sorted first by resident district. If you're a standalone district, this makes no difference to you because you only have one resident district. So it will be alpha order to you either way. But again, for a co-op, that would be more convenient. So I'm not going to say we don't have one sort on this because we do have it by resident district. Now, these would be the same fields that you would see in your headings, in your columns, if you exported this to Excel. So these would be things that you would be able to sort on in the Excel document as well. So I know, pretty boring blank screen, but I wanted to show what that report actually looked like. So next, indicator 11. So many of you may know that the LEA determinations came out recently back in September for your districts, and you may have had some findings on some of those, maybe not, maybe you did great on all of them. Regardless, this is a popular time for questions about indicators because the LEA determinations is essentially the representation of the year for your district and how well they did on the indicators that have findings on them. So results-based indicators are reported on. So you're not going to see every single indicator that you know about on LEA determinations, but you are going to see something about indicator 11. So indicator 11, for those of you who aren't completely familiar, is going to be the one where we look at the number of school days for initials that you've performed between the date the parent signed the consent and the date of the meeting. So we're looking at that 60-day timeline, school days based on your calendar. And so the report that you would be looking at as you're approaching this data being due is going to be the indicator 11 report by resident district. So we're still under application reports. I think everything we talk about from now on is an application report. We're still under a student report, of course, but this time we are letting the approvals stay at the default. We're just coming on down in our listing. So you see your alpha list of student approvals. We're coming down to the indicator 11 report by resident district. So what will this report print? So it tells you here, here's the description. Students with eligibility determined in the selected school year, which means you have made an indicator 11 entry. You have created a record in the current school year for a student. If you put data in last year for indicator 11, most of you did. So you had initials last year, you put in indicator 11 data for students who had initials. They're not going to print on this report for our current school year. Okay, so we're looking at the 23-24 school year. They're not going to print in the current school year. So what it will show you then is that you need to look in the school days column in this school year for the report and see, do any of those days exceed 60? So if you see in your data any days exceeding 60, then you want to jump over and see what was the reason for not meeting the timeline. Was it an acceptable reason or a not acceptable reason? So is it a compliant or non-compliant reason? So how do you figure that out? You can look in the approval manual And so where it talks about indicator 11, it's going to tell you certain reasons are going to keep you in compliance if you do go over the 60 days. So maybe, there are things that a district cannot control. Then there are going to be reasons that are not compliant reasons. Okay. So you want to look at those. What do you want to be concerned about or aware of? You want to be aware of days over 60 where the reason the timeline was not met falls in a not compliant reason. Okay, there's nothing you can do about that. You cannot change that now, but that is how you can be aware of what you may see on your LEA determinations next year. So next fall when they come out. So what do we do to help you with that? Well, I'm telling you, watch this report. But what we will do as the due date approaches for when ISBE picks up data for indicator 11 is we will send to you information about your records where we see days over 60, reason timeline not met in a non-compliant status. And we will ask you, was this intentional? Is this a clerical mistake? Sometimes it's not. And again, there's nothing you can do about it then, but at least you know about it. But maybe it is a clerical mistake, okay? So I have a question about what is indicator 11. So indicator 11 is for students that you are putting into iStar because you have done an initial evaluation for those students, not a re-eval, not an annual review. And regardless of whether the student receives services or does not, ISBE needs to know, did you complete the eligibility determination meeting within 60 school days of when the parent signed the consent? So if you did, then we aren't worried about a reason why the timeline was not met. So if it's 60 or less, that's great. You've done what you need to do. If it's over 60 days, then we do have to tell a reason why you exceeded the 60 school days between those two dates. Okay, so that's what indicator 11 is. Again, it's reported on every student that you do an initial on, whether they receive services or whether they do not receive services. And we have fund codes that can be put into the system for students when they do not end up receiving services, but they have had an initial evaluation. So that's another training, but we do have mechanisms to report this data for all students that you do an initial on, again, regardless of their outcome. So if, as an example, if they're ineligible, we have a way for you still to put them into the system, create an approval record for them, et cetera, so we can gather this data. So this is the report that you want to be looking at throughout the school year. This data is going to be due this year on July 15th. That is a change from previous years. You have had through July 31st in previous years to have indicator 11 data complete in iStar. So most of the time, indicator 11 is not an issue on completion. It's just whether you've taken a glance at it over summer to make sure that there aren't any clerical mistakes. So again, July 15th is when ISBE is going to pick this data up this year for indicator 11. All right, I think I already said all this. So we're going to move on. Indicator 13. Indicator 13 is going to be in Illinois for students 14 and a half or older. But when we talk about LEA determinations and at a federal level, it's for students 16 and older. So we start collecting in iStar at 14 and a half. We do require that for public students. The only ones that are not required are going to be parochial or homeschool students. Okay, wouldn't this indicator 13 report show up on our regular errors? Yes, it will, except not this one. So that's kind of why we're talking about this today. So when you have students that turn 14 and a half or older, they are supposed to have a transition plan in place in their IEP. Okay, so you will have records in iStar. When a student turns 14 and a half, if they do not have indicator 13 data entered in iStar for their transition plan, then you do receive a fatal error on your error report. So iStar will tell you if you are rechecking edits and running error reports on your own, it will tell you that you have an error on a student because they're 14 and a half or older and they do not have a transition plan or an indicator 13 record added into the system. So that's how you get a fatal error, because they do not have the record. Next, it will also give you a fatal error if you have created an indicator 13 record, but you have missed some of the circles. So when you look at this form, you're basically transferring what you see in the IEP on the transition plan. You're transferring that into iStar, and essentially you're just filling in a bunch of circles, putting a bunch of dots and a bunch of circles to answer yes and no questions. So that's what the form looks like, okay? If you miss something and you result in an incomplete form, so you have the form, you've started the form, but you haven't finished the form. So that's an incomplete. If it's incomplete, we again will give you a fatal error. And you need to make sure that at times when we're not sending you error reports, that you are occasionally running your own error reports. So you need to make sure you're rechecking edits and running an error report occasionally. Don't do this every day. It will bog the system down if everyone does this every day. But you do at some times need to be looking at errors that are not simply focused on deadlines that we email you about. So if we're emailing you about a specific deadline, there can be other errors in the system. So we've had a little bit of miscommunication about that recently. So I want to make sure that everybody knows you still once in a while need to be checking your errors as a whole. So make sure that you're looking at that. So if you have no record or an incomplete, we will give you a fatal error. So why am I talking about this today? Because if you fill out the form, you complete the form, but when you are finished, the data supplied does not fulfill the requirements of the indicator for the IEP. So the student has a transition plan in place, but it is not compliant. So that results in a no after you complete the data entry. If you have a no, we give you a warning. We cannot give you a fatal error for providing true data to us, so accurate data to us. So if you're looking at your form and you see, I'm reading this form from the IEP. Although this student does have a plan in place, it is not complete. It does not meet the indicator. It needs more work. So I'm resulting in, does this plan meet the indicator? No. You need to know that. So how will you know? Because the student is out of compliance, you need to know that as we are approaching a due date of 7/15 this year, you need to be looking well ahead of time at this report. Indicator 13, not meeting requirements. The error report will not show you these students because it's not incomplete. It's not an error. It's not blank. It's not partially completed. It's completed, but it's saying, although the form has been completed in the system, this indicator is not being met based on the student's transition plan. So why do you look early? To improve it. This is not like indicator 11. Indicator 11, if you've got 300 days, you can't take that back, okay? For 13, let's go back then. Let's check early. Let's start checking before school's out and see, do I have any kids left who have no's? Do they have warnings? Are they showing up on this report? If they are, that's not good. Because although, again, it's a completed form, they're not in compliance. So you're going to see these kids arise on your LEA determinations later. So look at it early. Look at the ones that are not meeting. Is it a clerical mistake? Did you miss something? It's supposed to be a yes. In the IEP, it's a yes, but I missed it. I filled out the wrong box somewhere. It came out to a no. Okay, great, correct it. Let's get the students off of this report. We want this report to be blank. Okay, so why does iStar erase indicator 13? Okay, indicator 13 should never disappear. So if that is happening to you, you need to let us know. Now, wait a minute. If you're an elementary versus high school district, that may be different. Okay, separate entities do not share data at all. So if you're an elementary district or a high school district and data has been entered, so if it's been entered for an 8th grader, they've gone to a high school district, a separate district, that is a different story because data is not typically shared. Okay, but otherwise we do not delete indicator 11 or 13 data ever. That should not be gone. Okay, if it is recorded under the high school district, it would remain. It should. So if you have a student that is in a high school district and they turn 14 and a half in their freshman year, and you put indicator 13 data in for them, that will continue to roll as long as they stay in your high school district. It would never leave. If they transfer to another district, it's a different story. So that's your data. That's your personal data. Okay. All right. Indicator 13 is not necessarily a one-time thing. So I don't want to be as far as data entry goes in iStar, yes, it should be a one-time thing, but indicator 13 and transition plans are supposed to be revisited every year for students in reality. So there can be changes. I don't want to, you know, make it sound like that it's just done for kids and never addressed again in general. So in reality, yes, it has to be addressed again. As far as taking it out of iStar from year to year for the same district, we do not do that. If they move around, yes, we do. Okay, so as clarification, indicator 13, it's a transition plan for post-secondary education. So essentially, yes, it is only going to be in Illinois for students 14 and a half and older. If you have pre-K students, they are not going to have indicator 13. You will not see an error message for them. That is not something that would be on their radar. Again, remember that in Illinois, we do start early. So we're talking about 14 and a half, but when we're talking about LEA determinations, it's 16 and older. Okay, so that's the federal standard. All right, so co-op data is a little bit different. So if you are a co-op and you are managing data for, say, all of your 20 districts, then that data is going to be based on the entity ID that's responsible for them. So you're going to see data transfer where if it was separate data, say maybe you had a kid come to you from Harrisburg or you sent a kid to Harrisburg, either way, data that you've put in is not going to be transferable between those two districts. You're not going to see things like that. But if you, as one person being the data steward inside your co-op, you're putting the data in, it is your data, it is your responsibility. So you're going to see different things inside a co-op than you would when I'm talking about separate elementary districts, high school districts, where the data stewards are different. So it does make a difference based on who is the data steward, who is the manager for the data. Okay, so again, these are for students who have warnings in iStar. They're not meeting the requirements. Start looking at this late spring, early summer. Make sure that when you're looking at this, that it's blank. Okay, and again, next slide is going to tell you this is due July 15th this school year. That's where we're going to pick up data for indicator 11 and 13. That is a new date. It's about 15 days, 15, 16 days earlier than it has been in the past, but ISBE needs more time for this data. So we need to just make sure that we all are aware that it's getting picked up earlier than usual. Okay, next is the child count snapshot by resident district. So I'm talking about last year's snapshot. So that's why I'm showing 22-23 school year. Why am I talking about last year's snapshot? Because we don't have one for this year yet. So why would this be relevant? Well, many of you know that the December 1 child count is used for various collections throughout the state at the state level, at a federal level. It's an extremely important number. We are approaching December 1, and of course we don't pick up all of that data until the new year. So that we're talking February before we would have anything that's going to be populating this. But sometimes it is important right now for you to be able to see the snapshot from last school year. So I'm still under student and approvals. I have not moved under the default of approvals so far. There are so many reports here. I realize it can be overwhelming, but they are really important for the ones that we're talking about today. So I tried to highlight the ones that we do need to be focusing on. So child count snapshot by resident district, it's going to be, again, we're running it from last year. You can only get it in an export, so Excel only. So why would this maybe be helpful to you? So the IDEA excess cost report deals with maintenance of effort information. It is submitted to the special ed division every year. I believe it's due at the end of January. But just so you know, some of the data from this comes from our December 1 child count from last school year. Now, it used to be that you would have to run the report and send certain things to the person completing this form in your district. You don't have to do that anymore. They have a new application for filling this out, and they grab the data from our system automatically, so you're not going to be responsible for that. But just so you know, when they are referring to data from here, if you're asked questions on this report and about the data they received, it's going to be that snapshot from last school year where that data is coming from. So it's a real specific query. It's not just going to be every child on there or anything like that. But if you are asked, where did this data come from? Is there it's going to be an export, not a report, but is there something I can look at to compare what I'm seeing? Questions like that. Go pull the December 1 child count export from last school year, email it to this person. That's where it came from, okay? Next, EE code counts for indicators that you're seeing on LEA determinations this school year. So 4B, yes, but 5 and 6 are really hot topics right now. If you have any questions about 5 and 6, I can help you with those. I have already filled out numerous templates of things on 5 and 6 for districts who are either under monitoring for LEA determinations. If you have a monitor assigned, we've been working with those folks already. So many districts that are not in compliance and are under monitoring already are going to have this done for them through your monitors. But if you have questions about this or want to see, where you stood last year or anything like that, you can let me know. I can go run some data for you, give you the data, give you some instructions, things like that. We've been doing a lot of that here lately, but it's mostly for districts who are concerned because they are having compliance issues on these. But for 5 and 6, these are around your educational environment codes. So if you have any questions about that, again, it comes from last year's child count. So when I give instructions to these districts this year who are under monitoring and going through DAT meetings and things like that, I'm going back into last school year and that report from last school year. So that December 1 child count, because that's where the indicator data for 4B, 5, and 6 comes from. A lot of the indicator data came from the December 1 child count, with the exception of 11 and 13 that we talked about earlier, because we just give you more time to get those done. So, all right, also your special education data profile, it's typically released in January, might be sooner this year. A lot of data is going to be coming again from last school year's December 1 child count. So that snapshot report is going to show you the data that you need. If you're looking at things on that and you want to know where that came from, you're going to go back to that December 1 child count snapshot again from last school year. All right. So this data was taken not February 2nd, I'm sorry, February 22nd of 2023. That is a typo on my part. So February 22nd is when the data was taken. It reflects records and unduplicated count of students that were active on December 1st of 2022. So many, many things that you are seeing now are reflecting data from the December 1, 2022 child count. Why? We don't have the new one yet, okay? All right. Next, I talked about this earlier, recheck edits. So throughout the school year, we have a lot of due dates. We all know this. Our next one is going to be the December 1 child count that is due in February of 2024. That's our next big due date. And as we approach that due date, we're going to send you emails. We're going to send you air emails. We're going to make calls to you. We're going to hover and try to help you and try to get that count as accurate as it can be leading up to that date. So when we send you emails regarding the December 1 child count, think about what we're sending to you, okay? We're sending to you errors on students who are active on December 1st. So what about other students? how do you know if those students have errors? So sometimes you're going to have to take the responsibility of making sure that you're checking all of your errors, because we don't just send out error reports to you based on everyone in your database, because you have the ability to run that on your own at your convenience. So again, is this something we want you to do every day? No, your data is not going to change that drastically for you to need to come in and do this every day. Again, as I told you earlier, if every single user comes in and does this every day, nobody's going to be able to use the system because it will not be able to handle that load. But to say that you never recheck edits and run your own error reports would be very false. Do not rely on the due date reports all the time. You need to be checking once in a while as well to see what errors do I have overall. Okay, you have a lot of other students that are not going to be involved in particular due dates that we are calling or emailing about. So in the summer, we're going to be calling you and emailing you about claims. That doesn't mean that you might not have hundreds of other errors on another area. So if we're collecting on orphanage, we're going to email you about D, E, and F approval and claims. You could have 200 Fund A errors. We're not telling you that. We're telling you, we're preparing you for a specific deadline. So what do? Every once in a while, make sure you're watching your complete error report for approvals. You want to see everyone that has an error, okay? So how do you do that? You'll go to your approvals page under reported, and you just come down here and hit this recheck edits button. What it will do is kick off that error checking process, and it will make sure that we have triggered the error checking right at that moment, and your error report at that moment will be completely up to date. It looks at all the other records in the system. It looks at your records. It looks at all the error checks and says, okay, based on all of these things, you have 6 overlaps with Harrisburg School District that need to be resolved. You have so many EE code errors on these students, all of those kinds of things, okay? So as soon as you finish running the recheck, you do get emails that will tell you this process has begun, this process has completed. When you get that completed email, which happens very quickly, by the way, it sounds like a long process, but it's not. So it happens very quickly. We're going to go back up to your application reports. We're going to be on type student still, but this time we're changing that category and we're going to errors. So we want to change it from approvals to errors, and we want the student approval errors listing. Now, often you're only concerned about fatal errors when we are looking at due dates and things like that. That doesn't mean warnings aren't important. I already told you earlier, indicator 11 warnings are indicator 13 warnings are pretty important. Okay, so I'm not saying they're not important, but you may want to focus first on your fatal errors. So if you want to do that and see just fatal errors in a report first, you are able to change your error type to fatal. And when you export the error report, it will only show you those first. Again, warnings are important, but they take a back burner to your fatal errors, because if you have fatal errors, it's not going to matter if you have a warning on the same record, because ISBE's not even going to see the record if it has a fatal error. So always focus on your fatal errors first. Okay, so that's the error report. Do I have any questions about the errors? Because I know I said a lot of things about what we send versus what you can run on your own, and what we will do and what you need to do. So if I have any questions, just let me know. And again, please don't do this every day. Okay, I don't see any questions. All right, reminder reports. These are something that you may want to run at the beginning of the school year. I don't hear a lot of questions about these reports, so I don't know if people are using them, if they don't like them, if they're not hearing about them. Okay, so back on the previous screen, run the recheck edits first, and then run the error report. Yes. So something that I didn't mention back on the error report, if you just come in every day and run the error report, if you never do a recheck, it's never going to change, unless ISBE turns on recheck edits at night and performs that automatically. We will announce in our news briefing when that does happen. So there will be times where ISB will turn the recheck on, and at night the recheck will run. So you will know in the morning when you come in that unless somebody was up all night doing data entry and messing everything up for you, unless that's happened, you'll know that your report is up to date. So, all right, so I've already got a message. Our district loves the reminder reports. Please don't get rid of them. Oh, I just ran all of these today. Awesome. Then that must mean that they work because we don't hear anything about them. So great. I'm glad to hear this. I think they're helpful. I bet, and obviously you all do too. But if you don't know about them, maybe you can start using them. So the second one I think is probably where we would get started. These are Alpha students turning 10 this school year. We're going to be concerned about these kids if they have a primary disability of N. So if they're developmentally delayed, they cannot have that disability after their, well, on their 10th birthday. So what you would need to know throughout the school year, what students are turning 10 in the school year that have a disability of N. So you're able to run this report, filter on disability of N, and then you will know who those students are. We did have a request this week to enhance that a little bit more to where we can also look at secondary disability. We're working on that, so we will see if that's something that's going to be taken care of. So again, that will be very helpful if you run at the beginning of the year so you can know what does your year look like for disability changes that need to occur. Next, Alpha students turning 14 and a half this school year. Hopefully you remember why we have this. So these are going to be the students that will need an indicator 13 plan during the school year because they are going to turn 14 and a half or older. Something that I'm not sure if I mentioned is that these are not going to be in place for parochial or homeschool students. So we're only talking about students that have IEPs in the public district as far as a transition plan goes. So no L's, no Fund Code L or Fund Code P for transition, okay? So next, Alpha students turning 15 this school year. These are going to be important for elementary districts because if you are an elementary district, and when I say that, I mean pre-K through 8. So if you're a separate district from the high school district, when your students who are possibly 7th or 8th graders may turn 15, if they do, they then become the responsibility of the high school district. So you would need to know who are those students. Those students have to be ended in the elementary district's ISTAR system the day before their 15th birthday, and then the high school district would pick them up starting on their 15th birthday. So next, Alpha students turning 6 this school year is moot. We do not worry about those anymore because our definitions for educational environment codes has changed since this was something that we needed. Gosh, I think it's been 2 or 3 years now. So you don't need to worry about kids turning 6 anymore. The last one is a customizable age. So if you want to know, I need to know all the kids who are turning 8 because somebody asked me for those. I need to know all the kids that are turning 8 this year. So you can run a report and say, here are all the kids that are turning 8 this year. Okay. All right. Any questions about any of these? I know a lot of people here in this group that are talking to me are already on our focus group for the newer version of iStar. But when we're talking about these things, we need to know where are the holes here? What do we need? Do these suffice? Are they great? I mean, I feel like they're great, but everybody says they're great. But if they're not, these are the kinds of things we need to know, and we need to know them now. So those of you who are involved in the focus group, this is where we need to know those things. If you want to be in the focus group, send me an email. The more the merrier. All right, so I know it looks like we're done, but I do want to talk just a second about the SIS iStar alignment report. So this is not an iStar report, so that's why I don't have fancy screenshots on it. The SIS iStar alignment report can be run by your districts in the student information system. It is a report that will tell discrepancies between the SIS system and the iStar system for certain students that have IEPs. What I want to say about this is, first of all, if your SIS administrator comes to you and says, here's this report, we have a lot of mismatches, and you need to make some changes in iStar. First and foremost, what you want to do is look at your error report. If you do not have error messages and what you see on approval records is correct, then there are not changes that you need to make, okay? So if the SIS iStar alignment report populates records on that, it prints lines on the report, but you don't have a problem in iStar on these kids, then something else is going on, and it doesn't mean that you need to make a change. If they come to you and say, I show this resident district and you show this resident district, you're already going to know because you have an iStar error, okay? And many times you are contacting, as the iStar data entry person, you're going to be in contact with this person already because it's creating a problem for you in iStar. Now, with that being said, those are going to be things that you work out between, the district admin and you as the iStar user. But there are going to be some things that are not perfect on that alignment report. So that's what I want to tell you about. First of all, that alignment report's always going to expect a serving district. And so we know in iStar that if you have a private facility student, a Fund Code B student, that you're not going to have all the same information that you would for a Fund A. So basically how you can kind of envision this is that the alignment report is looking for all of the fields to match, for example, for a Fund Code A student. But we have Bs, as we all know. We also have Fs, right? And that throws a wrench in that logic. So if your iStar admin comes to, or your SIS admin comes to you and says, hey, we've got mismatches here because you've got these kids and they don't have any serving district. And you're going to look at them and say, well, correct, we don't, because they're private facility kids. And that is not a required data element. It's not an option on the approval record when you have a private facility student. So if they're Fund B, we don't supply that. So yes, it's a mismatch, but it's still not a problem in iStar, okay? And it's never going to fall off the iStar or the SIS iStar alignment report. So if they run that alignment report and it's blank all the time, that's fabulous, but that means you don't have any Fund B kids, all right? So it's never going to be blank. Another thing is that they're relying in there on the IEP indicator. So there's an area in SIS that indicates true or false for whether or not a student has IDEA services. So IDEA services, that indicator represents they have an IEP. Well, it has to be accurate in their system. So maybe throughout the school year, a child did have an IEP, and the beginning of the year, they're doing great and they return to regular ed. Well, that's going to show up on that SIS iStar alignment report all year long still as a mismatch, because you're not going to have a record for them for the rest of the school year. And it's because they look at it on a year-to-year basis. They're not looking at that indicator on a date-specific basis. So it's going to say, well, they have an IEP indicator at some point in this year in SIS, and you don't have a record that represents every day. So you're going to say, no, and I shouldn't. They returned to regular ed on October 25th, and I did what I'm supposed to do, and we're going to have a mismatch, and that's okay. All right, so those are a couple things that I can think of off the top of my head. They're really the only two major, things that you may never resolve, and that's okay. All right, this is just intended to be in SIS to help, to inform SIS admins, to let them know how important the data in SIS is to the data in iStar, and that we need to have a good working relationship. But as far as perfection on that report, you're not going to see it, and that's probably never going to change. The logic on that's probably never going to change. So in other words, just you do the best you can with it. If somebody's coming to you with that, if they're up in arms about it, you will now know there are going to be some things that just aren't going to match up, and that's okay. All right, it's just intended to help. It's not intended to be some perfect match. All right, so the biggest thing for you is what's your iStar data look like? Do you have errors on the records? If you do, are they SIS related? And then we'll go from there. But again, as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes you are contacting that SIS person long before they're running the report. So, and not everyone runs the report, okay? Not all districts do that, but some do. And sometimes you'll have staff turnover, you'll have someone new come in and they may introduce you to this report for the first time ever, okay? But just so you're aware, the report exists. It is a SIS report. It is not a bad report. We love the report. We love to hear that someone has run that report and come to you with questions, because that's communication, all right? We don't like when there's no communication, because that's not going to be good for either system as far as the accuracy of the data goes. So, okay, I've got maybe a couple questions. Let's see here. So as far as the updating of these iStar SIS enrollment, I do know that it's overnight at a minimum. But you have to remember, I think a real big piece of that is on that IEP indicator. Just because you may, maybe like you tell them they don't have the IEP anymore, just because they go flip the switch off and turn it off, they're not going to fall off the report ever in that school year. So it's not specific enough. It's not date specific. It can just read that at one point in the school year they were IEP true or IDEA services true. So that's what I mean. They're probably not going to fall off that report. So as far as that updating, it's going to be next school year, probably, before it updates. So, all right, I'll take any other questions that anyone has. Any other report questions, let me know. If you guys think of something or you're working on something throughout the year and you need to pull a specific set of data, just reach out to me and let me know. There is a lot that can be done in Excel, and I know I realize that a lot of you you want a real pretty PDF report, and I don't blame you. It's easier. However, if you need data and someone's asking you for data, Excel is a great tool because you can manipulate that in just about any way that you need to, as long as you have the data coming out of the system. So we can do a lot with that. And not that I can't necessarily make you a beautiful PDF, but I could probably get you a pivot table or something fancy at times. So, all right, as far as how often do I suggest doing the rechecks? I think this is a sneak peek, but I think that we're going to announce Monday in our news briefing that the recheck is going to be turned on nightly from now all the way through February. Okay, so I think right now we're going to have ISBE do it for you. However, every couple of weeks I would do that. I would do it about once every 2 weeks and run that report. Just make sure a report's up to date. If you're not been doing this, don't panic. I just think that maybe this is something where, and maybe we have given the impression that we're always running everything you need to know and giving it to you. So it was probably a dual fail maybe there, but you do have to keep in mind that that does have to be done. And if, a lot of you have been using iStar for a very long time, since the beginning, and so you haven't had a new user training. And so that's something we go over in new user trainings, but some of you were part of the beginning of this, some of you piloted this. And so I understand that there are things that kind of go by the wayside or you forget or things like that, but it's just not something as a whole that we're sending to you every day. Okay. All right, what about the unreported list? It's the same idea. So if that IDEA indicator is turned on any point in the year, you're going to see that kid on the unreported tab. If they don't need to be an ISTAR, don't worry about it. I know that it makes a lot more for you guys, especially as a co-op, to have to weed through for those kids, but it's just something that the real big thing is that the districts have to make sure that, okay, when we talk about SIS and when I talk about SIS, I'm thinking at the high level of the SIS data that sits at ISB. But a lot of times when we're talking to districts, they're looking in this student management system and they're thinking that that's the gospel. And most of you know that if they aren't doing uploads, it means nothing to ISTAR. So the other thing about that IEP indicator, that IDEA service is true, is that they need to make sure that they're unchecking it in their management system. Just because it gets unchecked one time at ISB in SIS, they can be doing batches and rechecking it over and over and over again. So if they go into the interface, into ISB's interface, and they change something there, but they continue to batch up something contradictory, they're just overriding it every time. So they have to make sure that if they're changing it in their third-party system, in their management system at the district, that they're not inadvertently overriding their work back and forth. So that's something too that does happen. Okay, so it's happened to some people. And I think they have many indicators, so it's not just us. So when you go, I have read-only access to SIS, so there's only so much I can see. But when I look a student up, I can see the indicators tab, and we're just one of many. So we just rely on one little piece of SIS, and we get that. So, and that's too why you're going to see mismatches and things. We're just a tiny portion of, we rely on them a lot, but we're still just a tiny portion of that system. So the things that we need. So, okay, I will take any more questions anyone has. Thank you guys so much for the questions and the interaction. Most of you know this makes a much, much better training. Without all that, this might have been a 15-minute training, and that's not always helpful to everyone. So thank you. I love you guys too. But I do like trainings where everybody is participating, because these can get very mundane after doing them for so many years. So I want them to be helpful and beneficial. And so when y'all ask questions and put in your feedback, that helps the other districts a lot. And it seems a lot more like a round table than just me standing up here yapping. So. Okay. I know everybody misses in person, and believe it or not, I do too, to an extent. Yeah, I don't disagree. So I could probably twist my boss's arm into doing some big regional ones again, but yeah, some of you are retiring, so maybe I have to get on that quicker than I'm thinking. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Remember, if you guys think of something, if you have a request 6 months down the road from a board, from someone for a board meeting or whatever, reach out to us, let us know, let us try to help you and get that data out to you. Again, there's a lot of data there. There are a lot of ways to get it out of the system, and we can help you do that. And remember that if you need anything on indicators right now, reach out to me for 5 or 6. Of course, 11 and 13 as well. Those are pretty straightforward. But if you need help on 5 or 6, I can help with those. If you have issues on 1, indicator 1, I'm sorry, I cannot help you on that one. So, but the other ones I can't. So, as far as any other trainings that I could suggest for special education. So, if you get the superintendent's newsletter, watch that, because sometimes there are trainings there that you may think don't necessarily apply to you, but a lot of times here we'll think, oh, it might be a good thing for us to know a little bit more about the background of that, even though it's not really something that we don't give advice on how you write IEPs or anything like that, but maybe we should know a little bit about that. So anything you can learn about IEPs is going to help you if you're putting data in the system. You're going to have a better understanding. Sometimes you're just going to be like, that's what's on the paper and that's what I'm putting in. But you can change that to where I see something on the paper and I don't think that's right. I think that's a typo. And then you can take it back and say, but if so that's what I would look for. Things in the newsletter, I would always look at the newsletter. We read it every week. Sometimes we're debuted in there. You might see some Harrisburg Project stuff in there. But that's where we tend to look. Now, I personally subscribe to every mailing that ISBE offers, but a lot of that, is just for my own information more than anything. So, but I think that as long as you're reading that, you will see things that will be helpful to you. Oh, good. Yes. Thank you, Jesse. SIS webinars. Not every year, but it's a good idea for you to listen to one of their beginning of year and end of year trainings. It's not something you need to do every year, because they do have, I cannot even, I don't even know if I could begin to imagine the amount of data and areas that they collect for. Okay. And again, we are just a small piece of that, but for you to get a good understanding of what the whole system is about, beginning of year and end of year, just one time, not every year, but it's a good to have a basic understanding of what that system is like, because we do rely on it heavily. But I mean, and if you haven't and you're doing fine with it, that's fine. But if you are kind of interested in the ins and outs of how the system is operating versus ours, that's helpful. See if anything else. So yes, if you really want to know about the data that you're putting into the system, then I would recommend that you keep an eye on that, and you're going to recognize things that might be helpful to you. And you know what? Most of it is free. If you sign up for something and you get on it for 5 minutes and realize, nope, this is not helpful, I don't need to do this, then you can just hang up. So, but a lot of it will be very clear to you that it's something that is important, or that you might have a couple little things click as you're going along. And then I have a lot of recorded trainings on our website, but they're all going to be more iStar related. So as far as that goes, I would not sit down and watch every one of them all at once. I would kind of look at what's timely, what's going on in the school year, and then kind of look through the YouTube channel and see what's important now. Because, a lot of that is so overwhelming even to do all at once anyway. So that's what I would do. All right, those are all the questions that I see. So if you think of anything, please let me know. Reach out to us. We're happy to help. We're kind of in that, where I feel like it's Christmas already, but so December 1 pickup's going to be here before we know it. I'm adding a new training this winter, something we've never done before. I'm going to try to show you how to correct errors to the best of my ability. So we're going to have something a little bit new. A lot of you may not be helpful to you, but that is something new that we are going to add, and obviously before the snapshot is picked up. So that's something to look forward to in the new year. As far as the end of the year here goes, yes, we have reports, we have a website navigation coming up, and it's not going to be anything real earth-shattering. And then in December, we're going to do something about getting ready for 2024, the pickup, all those good things. So that's kind of what we're looking at for the rest of the year as far as training. If you need individual training, I know some of you I've been doing this with. If you need individual training, please reach out, go under Hot Topics on our website and sign up where it says want customized training. Happy to help. This is a good time to do that. I'm not going to say we're not busy, but we're not as busy as we have been. So good time to do some extra training and cram some things in, especially for us right now. So my schedule is pretty open. So please reach out if you need to. Otherwise, I will see y'all at the next session, and I hope that everyone has a good week and enjoys this probably last of our beautiful weather. So thanks, guys. See y'all next time. Bye-bye.